Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, September 11th, 2024. House Speaker Mike Johnson cancels a scheduled vote on a bill that would fund the federal government for 6 months beyond the October 30th deadline, preventing a government shutdown, and require proof of U.S. citizenship to register to vote. Apparently because it appeared the vote would fail due to overwhelming Democratic opposition and enough Republicans planning to vote no. We'll talk with the Hill's congressional reporter Mychael Schnell about where things stand. Former President Donald Trump, the Republican presidential nominee, criticizes ABC News and the moderators of last night's presidential debate with Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic nominee, calling them the most dishonest news organization. Solemn ceremonies on the anniversary of the September 11th terrorist attacks at Ground Zero in New York City, at the Pentagon, and in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin saying that for many Americans affected by the attacks, it can feel as if life has largely returned to normal, but not for those who work at the Pentagon. He said, "We don't just work near a memorial, we work in a memorial." And Secretary of State Antony Blinken visits Kyiv, Ukraine, with the British Foreign Secretary, pledging another $1.5 billion in aid and discussing allowing Ukraine to use long-range weapons to strike deep into Russian territory. Story from NBC News. Speaker Mike Johnson on Wednesday yanked a government funding bill off the House floor hours before an expected vote after a growing number of disgruntled Republicans vowed to tank the measure. Following Donald Trump's lead, Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, had tied a 6-month funding bill to the SAVE Act, which would overhaul voting laws to require people to show proof of citizenship when registering to vote. But now Johnson's strategy to avert a shutdown at the end of the month is up in the air. The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York, Democrats and some Republicans are pushing for a clean funding bill that would keep the government open until December after the November elections. That was from NBC News. Speaker Johnson spoke to reporters in the U.S. Capitol building.
What are your plans for this vote tonight?
Let me just say this very clearly. The American people demand and deserve that we do everything possible to secure the elections. That's what we've been saying consistently. That's what I have heard from the people across the country in 198 cities across 39 states. It's consistent from coast to coast, north to south. We're going to continue to work on this. The whip is going to do the hard work and build consensus. We're going to work through the weekend on that. And I want any member of Congress in either party to explain to the American people why we should not ensure that only U.S. citizens are voting in U.S. elections. We're going to work on that issue around the clock because we have an obligation to the people to do it. And that's what the fight is. That's what's important. It's the most pressing issue right now. And we're going to get this job done.
Mr. Speaker, to be clear, so that no vote today, right?
No vote today because we're in the consensus building business here in Congress with small majorities. That's what you do. That's what I've been doing since I became Speaker. We're having thoughtful conversations, family conversations within the Republican conference, and I believe we'll get there. So people have concerns about all sorts of things. That's how the process works, and sometimes it takes a little more time.
So you're going to continue pursuing this strategy, but not today for a vote?
We have two obligations right now. Congress has a lot of responsibilities, but two primary obligations. Responsibly fund the government and make sure that our elections are free and fair and secure. And that's what we're working on, and we'll continue, and we'll keep you posted.
House Speaker Mike Johnson speaking to reporters today in the U.S. Capitol building. This week, a number of House Republicans publicly said they would vote no on the combined bill, government funding for 6 more months at current levels and requiring proof of citizenship to vote. One of those Republicans spoke to reporters on the U.S. Capitol steps Monday, Beth Van Dyne of Texas.
I am not voting for it. I look at the continuation. I've never voted for a clean CR. I look at it as a continuation of Nancy Pelosi era spending. I've been pushing back. I think one of the top things that we've seen in our country is rising debt, and it's a problem. You know, when cost of living is so extreme that people are having to decide whether or not to put food on the table or gas in their cars, it's an issue. We have to address it. We can't just keep kicking that down the road. I voted for the SAVE Act. I'm all for the SAVE Act, but I think it's too little too late. Even if we were to enact it, even if the Senate passes it, even if Biden were to sign it tomorrow, I don't think it actually would affect this election.
Congresswoman Beth Van Dyne, Republican from Texas, speaking to reporters Monday on the U.S. Capitol steps today, right before Speaker Johnson officially took the combined continuing resolution funding the government and that SAVE Act, proof of U.S. citizenship to vote, off of today's schedule floor debate. Congresswoman Jennifer McClellan, Democrat of Virginia, spoke on the House floor against the SAVE Act.
Mr. Speaker, once again, we find ourselves in the position where rather than passing bipartisan appropriation bills, House Republicans have once again loaded must-pass legislation with their MAGA wish lists. This time, it's the SAVE Act, which seeks to address non-citizen voting, which is already illegal and punishable by up to 5 years in prison, despite no evidence of a widespread problem. But what the SAVE Act really is the latest Republican effort to restrict access to the ballot box with burdensome proof of citizenship requirements. But under this bill, Americans would not be able to use their driver's license, any state-provided ID, military or tribal ID. The only acceptable form of proof of citizenship will cost money, such as a passport. That is a poll tax. I took my oath of office in this body on the Bible in which my father kept the poll tax receipt that he had to pay as a reminder of how my family had to fight for the sacred right to vote. I will not stand for a new poll tax to be put into federal law, and I urge my colleagues to vote no on today's CR. Thank you, and I yield back.
Congresswoman Jennifer McClellan, Democrat from Virginia, on the House floor earlier today. House Speaker Mike Johnson, a short time later, decided not to bring up that bill that put together a 6-month government funding extension and a bill requiring proof of U.S. citizenship to vote. Joining us now to talk about all this is The Hill's congressional reporter Mychael Schnell. Thanks again for being with us. So what is the Speaker saying about the status of the combined bill and especially the government funding portion?
Yeah, right now that is on hold. Remember, that was supposed to come up for a vote this afternoon, that 6-month continuing resolution, paired with the SAVE Act, which would require proof of citizenship to vote in U.S. elections. And it had faced mounting opposition within the House Republican Conference from hardline conservatives, from defense hawks, and then also there was some concern among moderate House Republicans. Yesterday, Johnson made it clear he still planned to bring this to the floor. I had asked him what would, the visual be like if this were to fail on the floor, and he said, well, sometimes you have to do what you think is important and let the chips fall where they may. Well, it appears now Johnson does not want to see where those chips are going to fall, or he knows that it would not be a good look for them. Earlier this morning, Speaker Johnson telling reporters that he's going to pull that package from the vote schedule for this afternoon and take the weekend to build consensus. So he's going to try to lock down, at least he says, try to lock down some more support for this package over the weekend. Maybe we'll see another vote on it next week. Maybe we'll see a new strategy next week. But this is, continuing with this process to fund the government ahead of the September 30th shutdown deadline.
Before he pulled the bill, about how many Republicans said publicly they would not vote for this?
Around 9. And that was just publicly, because remember, we were hearing from a number of lawmakers behind the scenes saying that they were either undecided, that they had made their decision and did not want to release it yet, which, not a great time for Johnson, or folks who said that they were leaning no, but they still wanted to parse their particulars. There were even some moderates earlier this week who were saying that they were going to withhold their vote on the legislation until Speaker Johnson had said what his plan B was. And remember, he had said there was no plan B, that they were not thinking of any other strategies, that this was the one they wanted to move forward with. So back to your initial question, probably 9, but there were sure to be more who would have come out of the woodwork when that vote hit the floor. It would have definitely been a tough vote for Speaker Johnson. If everyone is in attendance and all Democrats voted no, Johnson would only be able to lose 4 votes of his own. Congressman Jared Golden, a moderate Democrat from Maine, had said that he was going to vote for this package, but that's only going to help them with one person. That's only going to move the needle a little bit. The opposition was still more than Johnson could lose, so he ultimately made the decision that today is not the day to hold this vote.
So we don't know what could come up next week, but what is the Speaker's view about a possible government shutdown if he has no plan B? Donald Trump posted yesterday that he's in favor of shutting down the government if that SAVE Act or something similar is not attached to a government funding measure.
Yeah, those comments from former President Trump not helpful. Speaker Johnson's made known that he understands the implication of a shutdown, that he does not want that. Because remember, it wouldn't be helpful for him in one of his key goals right now, which is expanding the House majority. There are a number of moderate Republicans who are concerned about having the threat of a shutdown so close to Election Day. These are folks who are running in the closest races in the most purple districts, where a shutdown could hurt them at the ballot box. So Johnson knows politically, electorally, however you want to put it, that a shutdown would not be helpful at this juncture so close to the election. But you mentioned former President Trump, who is really the de facto leader of the Republican Party. He came out yesterday and said that Republicans should not fund the government unless they deal with election integrity. Well, that's essentially referring to the SAVE Act, and the SAVE Act is a non-starter among Democrats in the Senate and in the House. So if Johnson were to follow Trump's request, it would almost certainly end in a government shutdown. So those comments, not hopeful for the Speaker. We're going to have to see what he comes back with next week, if it's the same SAVE Act plus 6-month CR, if it's a different tweaked conservative bill, if he jumps right to the bicameral bipartisan negotiations. We don't know, but he has made it abundantly clear that he does not want to shut down the government.
I'm talking with Mychael Schnell from The Hill. One more question. What is the thinking behind a 6-month continuing resolution? That's half of the fiscal year, a little longer than we've seen CRs in the past.
Right. There's two parts to the math here. Republicans are hoping that former President Trump will win the election in November, which means that a 6-month continuing resolution would give him an opportunity to put his mark on the appropriations process. Now, of course, that's a massive gamble right now. The battleground state polls, the national surveys show that this race is very close between Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris. But Republicans are willing to roll that dice, hoping that Trump wins and that he will be able to impact appropriations. The second thing is one thing that Republicans really abhor is what's called an end-of-the-year omnibus. It's basically a very large, sweeping package of government funding. It compiles all 12 appropriations bills. It's typically crafted by leadership, released a few days, maybe even hours before a vote. Congress votes on that, and that is funding for the next fiscal year. Republicans hate omnibus. They do not like to fund the government through omnibus bills. So they're hoping that by avoiding that crunch time December funding deadline, which is usually when it comes down to, they're hoping that a 6-month CR gives Congress enough time to hash out funding ahead of that March 28th deadline and would allow them to prevent an omnibus. Now, whether or not it's successful, we'll have to see. But Republicans are really hoping that they can keep this as a longer-term funding bill. Though I will note, this is the component that's sparking concern among Republican defense hawks. We heard from Chairman Mike Rogers, the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, and some other defense hawks that they have heard concerns, and they are concerned about the impact a 6-month CR could have on Pentagon funding, that would it be adequate enough? That's a key concern among that part of the Republican conference. So, we'll have to see what happens with the 6-month request, but it's been a key demand among hardline conservatives.
Mychael Schnell is a congressional reporter for The Hill. Her stories are at thehill.com and on Twitter at Mychael Schnell, spell Michael with a Y. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
And the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, came to the Senate floor late afternoon to talk about the concept of that 6-month CR. He said that is a non-starter with the Senate Democrats because they do not want a potential President Trump to put his stamp on the appropriations process.
And make no mistake, there's no better opportunity for Republicans to ram these cruel policies down American throats than a government funding fight early next March. A 6-month CR, particularly one that fails to fund important programs, some of which I've outlined a few minutes ago, is therefore not the answer for avoiding a shutdown later this month. Speaker Johnson ought not bother with merely delaying his vote. He should scrap it, scrap his plan and start over. Speaker Johnson, scrap your plan. Don't just delay the vote. Find a better one that can pass in a bipartisan way. Leader Jeffries, the President, and I will gladly and readily work with the Speaker to keep the government open, just as we worked with him earlier this year on funding levels that honored our agreement from the debt ceiling debate. I pray Speaker Johnson will soon acknowledge the inevitable. We need a bipartisan plan to keep the government open.
The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer on the Senate floor. The issues of U.S. citizenship and voting, which at the moment is part of that package with the 6-month government funding measure in the House, came up today during a House Administration Committee hearing titled American Confidence in Elections Looking Ahead to the 2024 General Election. Testifying were 6 secretaries of state. Here is the chair of the committee, Congressman Brian Stile, Republican of Wisconsin, questioning Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRose, Republican, and Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, a Democrat.
Mr. LaRose, you removed 500 non-citizens from the voting rolls. In reading your remarks and in conversations with you, you went through, took your state motor vehicle database. You cross-referenced that from the DHS SAVE database, and were able to determine that there were 500 non-citizens on your voter rolls. Is that accurate?
That's accurate, Mr. Chairman.
And so as we look to other states, Mr. Fontes, you said you removed a number of ineligible voters. Ms. Benson, you referenced that you removed, I think, 800,000 ineligible voters over the course of the past 5 years. Did you do the same work that Mr. LaRose did, where you checked your vehicle database and cross-referenced the DHS SAVE database? I'll start with you, Secretary Benson.
Thank you. We actually do a number of things to ensure and review the eligibility of our citizens.
Do you
and we do a number of audits, actually. We use the SAVE system when people are actually registering and getting their license, but we can't use it to actually go back and look at people who are already registered
because
of the way that the system is set up. But what we do,
so we could. Would you utilize it if we set it up and gave
access? May I
access?
respond to the auditing we are already doing, which is it makes that unnecessary. We actually go back and every single person.
How do you confirm whether or not an individual is a citizen without doing a back check to the SAVE database?
Everyone who goes into our system when they get a license or ID has to show some sort of documentation. In that documentation, their citizenship is essentially verified.
It's essentially verified, but why not check it against the SAVE database?
We do at that time.
But you don't retroactively do it in review.
We are unable to do it retroactively based on the database.
So we could. So in my legislation, we actually give states back the access to be able to utilize that. Mr. LaRose, you were able to do that. How were you able to do that?
We're able to do that based on the agreement that we've reached with DHS to use the SAVE database. But there's a hole in using motor vehicle data exclusively, because there are some people that don't get a motor vehicle operator's license or don't get a state ID. And that's where we're able to fill that hole by also querying the SAVE database, which is foolishly, they charge us $1 or something a query to do that.
I'll note our legislation, and in the SAVE Act, gives states free access to the database. And per Mr. Secretary Fontes' comment with funding, what we're working on is making sure that states have that access unimpeded by cost and giving states access to the U.S. information as to whether or not an individual is a citizen. I'd encourage all of you to continue to work with the federal government to get access as Secretary LaRose did. And I'd encourage the House and the Senate to pass and ultimately be signed into law the SAVE Act, which would give states full access into that database.
Congressman Brian Stile, Republican from Wisconsin, chair of the House Administration Committee, questioning witnesses Frank LaRose, Ohio Secretary of State, Republican, and Jocelyn Benson, Michigan Secretary of State, Democrat. Other witnesses at the hearing were the Secretaries of State from Florida, Arizona, New Mexico, and Wyoming. A Reuters article about this hearing reads, top election officials from 2 U.S. states warned a congressional panel on Wednesday that confidence in elections has been eroded by ideological efforts to discredit the system that have spawned unrelenting threats against election workers. The 2 Secretaries of State referenced in that article, New Mexico and Michigan. You can find the video of this hearing in its entirety at cspan.org, our video library. From the New York Daily News, an estimated 65 million viewers tuned in to watch the debate between former President Trump and Vice President Harris. Preliminary overnight television ratings revealed Wednesday. The estimate, based on results in the nation's major TV markets, is 28% bigger than the number of viewers who saw Trump face off against President Biden in June. The debate hosted by ABC drew an overnight rating of 32.8 and a 70% share of all viewers across 8 networks. Doesn't include C-SPAN. It was covered on C-SPAN Radio and C-SPAN Television. We simulcast ABC News, but we do not have ratings. Donald Trump was interviewed today on Fox News Channel. When asked how he thought the debate went, he spent the first 2 minutes of his answer talking about the moderators and the host network.
Well, I looked at the poll numbers. I listened to Harold Ford. I don't know what he was watching because I think he wasn't watching the debate that I was in yesterday. I think we did great. It was 3-1. It was a rigged deal, as I assumed it would be, because when you looked at the fact that they were correcting everything and not correcting with her, and we knew it when it was 100% good coverage for her over the last month or last year. I looked at it and only bad coverage of me, no matter what. The press is so dishonest in this country, it's amazing. Now, I didn't mind because, frankly, I was pretty sure that's what they would do. CNN was much more honorable. The debate we had with Biden was a much more honorably run debate, but this was incredible. I mean, everything, so many things I said were debunked, totally debunked, like Charlottesville. I have a list of 7 different things, and she could say anything she wanted. Every time I spoke, and my stuff was right, they'd correct you. I thought it was terrible from the standpoint of ABC. They're the most dishonest, in my opinion, the most dishonest news organization, and that's saying a lot because they're all essentially really dishonest. But I thought I did a great job. It was 3-on-1. And I thought I did a great job. Now, we sent you the polls, but every single poll last night had me winning like 90-10. We had C-SPAN. At one point, it was at 80-20, and I don't know how it finished. That was late last night, so I have no idea. But it was at 80-20. I told that to Brett Baer, and we sent him a lot of polls, and we sent you a lot of polls this morning. And every single poll had us winning by a lot, despite the fact that it was an unfair debate, obviously, and it was a 3-on-1. And that's okay. I've had worse odds in my life. I've had it before, but never so obvious. A lot of people are very angry about it. You have corrupt news organizations. You have a lot of bad people. It's amazing in that business. In your business.
Former President Donald Trump, Republican presidential nominee, this morning on the Fox News channel. He was also asked whether he would take part in a second debate against Vice President Kamala Harris. He said, "I'd be less inclined to because we had a great night. We won the debate. We had a terrible, terrible network." Later on his Truth Social online platform, he wrote, "In the world of boxing or UFC, when a fighter gets beaten or knocked down, they get up and scream, 'I demand a rematch, I demand a rematch.' Well, it's no different with a debate. She was beaten badly last night. Every poll has us winning. In one case, 92-8. So why would I do a rematch?" That post from Donald Trump. Kamala Harris, with husband, Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff, stopped by a debate watch party in Philadelphia late Tuesday night after the debate.
Tonight, I think, highlighted for the American people what's at stake. I started the debate by talking about it, and it became apparent, I think, throughout that about an hour and a half, that look, this is very much 2 different visions for our country. Ours, which is a vision for the future, and his, which is about the past and taking us backward. And as I said on the debate stage, we are not going back. We are not going back. And so we know what we're fighting for. We know what we stand for, and that's why we know what we're fighting for. We're fighting for the dignity of all people. We're fighting for the dignity of work. We are fighting for middle-class families. We are fighting to uplift people, understanding the true measure of the strength of a leader is not based on who you beat down, it's based on who you lift up. That's what we stand for. And so we've got some work to do because, listen, I think that we think today was a good day, and it kind of was. But we have 56 days to go, and guys, we're still the underdogs in this race. It's tight. We have got to win Pennsylvania, and we are going to win Pennsylvania, and it is because of you. It is because of you who have signed up, who have volunteered. You are organizing. You're helping us to email and text and knock on doors and talk to your neighbors and your friends. And here's the thing about the spirit of our campaign. It is people-driven. It is about the people. It is about uplifting our country. This is a campaign born out of love of country. We love our country. We believe in who we are. We believe in the American people. This is a campaign about bringing folks together, knowing the vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us.
Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic presidential nominee, Tuesday night after the presidential debate with Donald Trump, attending a watch party in the city of Philadelphia where the debate took place. Kamala Harris HQ on X writing today, "Our newest ad just dropped," and attaches a video of the entire presidential debate, 1 hour and 40 minutes. This Saturday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, C-SPAN will show an encore presentation of Tuesday's ABC News presidential debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. That's Saturday, September 14th, 6:30 p.m. Eastern. Story from Axios. Since Taylor Swift endorsed Kamala Harris for president Tuesday night, more than 306,000 people have visited vote.gov using the voter registration link Swift shared alongside it, according to NPR. Recent polling in Tennessee suggests Swift's opinion could have a small but significant impact on how some of her fans vote. An April poll from the Beacon Center, a libertarian political think tank, found 37% of registered Tennessee voters considered themselves Taylor Swift fans. Within that group of Swifties, 12% said that if Taylor Swift endorsed a candidate for president or U.S. Senate, it would make them more likely to vote for that candidate. That is a small sliver of the electorate, and it isn't expected to sway the results in Tennessee, where polls show former President Trump is in a commanding lead. The Beacon Center poll could be more impactful in close swing states where results often come down to the wire. That was from Axios. And from the Delaware News Journal, State Senator Sarah McBride, a Democrat, will face Republican John Whalen III for Delaware's seat in Congress in November's election. If elected, McBride would be the first transgender person elected to federal office and the youngest elected official Delaware has sent to Washington since Joe Biden won a Senate seat in 1972. Statistically, McBride is the favorite in November. Registered Democrats outnumber Republican voters in Delaware by nearly 150,000. That was from the Delaware News Journal. Sarah McBride spoke to her supporters at a victory party Tuesday night.
Tonight we celebrate our victory in the primary. We all know that our work is far from over. And we know what is at stake in this election. We know what is on the line with the MAGA extremists who are on our ballot here in November in Delaware. We know what happens if Donald Trump wins and Republicans get the full control of Congress. They will not hesitate 1 second to pass their Project 2025 agenda. Instead of protecting and enhancing Social Security and Medicare, they will gut them. Instead of improving public schools and expanding access to child care, they will defund them. Instead of protecting access to reproductive health care, they will ban it. Our rights and our freedoms, our dignity and our democracy are on the line in this election. But so too is the promise of tomorrow. Because we aren't just here because of what's at risk. We are also here because of what is possible. We are here because we love this state and this country, and we know that we can come together to build a government that truly sees and respects all of us. We know it's possible to guarantee quality, affordable health care for every patient, to provide affordable housing and child care for every family. We know it's possible to rebuild the middle class with a livable wage, strong benefits, and thriving unions. We know it's possible to protect reproductive freedom and to end the scourge of gun violence once and for all. Y'all, hope and joy are making a comeback in America in 2024.
Sarah McBride, Tuesday night after winning the Democratic primary for the only U.S. House seat in Delaware. If she wins the general election in November, she would become the first openly transgender person elected to Congress. In an interview with the Associated Press, she said the goodness of Delawareans who judge a candidate based on ability, not identity, contributed to her success. And she said, I'm not running to make history. I'm running to make historic progress for Delawareans. Wall Street today, the Dow up 124, NASDAQ up 369, S&P up 58. Inflation continues to loosen its grip on American consumers, writes CNN, with price hikes slowing by the most in 3.5 years, according to new data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics released Wednesday. The Consumer Price Index, a measure of price changes for a commonly purchased basket of goods and services, briskly retreated from a 2.9% annual increase in July to 2.5% in August, marking the lowest annual increase since February 2021 and landing at a rate that matched the average seen in 2018. That was reporting from CNN. Senator John Barrasso, Republican from Wyoming, talked about the economy and the inflation report today on the Senate floor.
We learned this morning the new numbers have come out on inflation. Prices are higher today than they were the day that the Biden-Harris administration took over by over 20%. I hear about it in Wyoming every weekend, heard about it this past weekend, how high prices have become and the crushing effect that that's had on families in my state in Wyoming and all around the country. This has been going on now for over 3 years. Prices have continued to go up. And this crisis of high prices has been cumulative. The impact on families, cumulative. And it is regrettably causing very hard choices for families to make. It shouldn't be this way. Here's a recent headline from CBS News. It said, more Americans are having to choose between food and energy bills. Clearly, this is a reflection on the Biden-Harris administration.
Senator John Barrasso, Republican from Wyoming, today on the Senate floor. President Joe Biden put out a written statement about the inflation report. Today's report shows we are making real progress, with inflation falling to 2.5%, continuing at the lowest level in more than 3 years. Story from CBS News, the nation's more than 70 million Social Security recipients may want to temper their expectations of how much more they'll be getting in 2025. Retirees are looking at an average monthly bump of $48, or an increase of 2.5%, according to projections released on Wednesday. The 2025 cost of living adjustment, or COLA, which is based on the rate of inflation, is now forecast to come in below last month's 2.57% calculation, the Senior Citizens League, an advocacy group for older Americans, said. That was from CBS News. The Social Security Commissioner, Martin O'Malley, testified today on Capitol Hill before the Senate Budget Committee about the long-term solvency of Social Security. And in his opening statement, he said his agency's budget needs to be increased, or customer service, he said, will suffer.
Social Security today, not 10 years from now, but today, is struggling to serve more customers than ever with staffing levels reduced to 50-year lows. And I do not believe for a moment that this was the intention of Congress. But the cold result is customer service, for which Americans have already paid by working their whole lives, has now been reduced to crisis levels. What does that crisis level look like? You've heard the calls and you've heard the cries. Hour-long waits, sometimes an hour and a half on the 800 number. Financial hardships inflicted oftentimes on our elderly and most vulnerable citizens through no fault of their own because of overpayments and the injustice of underpayments that it takes us too long to catch up to. And in far too many states, almost a year-long wait now. A year-long wait just for the initial disability determination, with a record backlog of 1.2 million cases. Members of the committee, this is what happens when an agency is forced to serve more and more and more people with fewer and fewer and fewer staff. And the American people deserve better. In fact, they've already paid for better. I know your offices have received their calls. We see their faces every day in 1,211 now understaffed field offices all across America. So you might be heartened to learn that in recent months, with your advice, consent, and support, notwithstanding the enormity of the challenge, we have taken bold steps to achieve real and measurable progress on some of our toughest problems. We have now reduced the wait times on the 800 number by 50%. We have eliminated the clawback cruelty by changing policies so that we no longer intercept 100% of a retiree's check in order to recoup the overpayment. We have cleared now, for the first time in recent memory, we have cleared more cases every week for 12 weeks in a row in the initial disability determinations than have been filed on the front end of that process. And we have reduced the ALJ, the appellate level hearing backlog, to a 30-year low. But make no mistake about it, these recent gains will be short-lived without your immediate attention and support.
Social Security Administration Commissioner Martin O'Malley before the Senate Budget Committee. The Biden administration has proposed a Social Security Administration budget for fiscal year 2025, which starts October 1st, of $15.4 billion. The Senate Appropriations Committee, led by Democrats, proposed $14.7 billion, and the House, controlled by Republicans, want $13.7 billion. Washington Today continues in a moment.
C-SPAN Now is a free mobile app featuring your unfiltered view of what's happening in Washington, live and on demand. Keep up with the day's biggest events with live streams of floor proceedings and hearings from the U.S. Congress, White House events, the courts, campaigns, and more from the world of politics, all at your fingertips. You can also stay current with the latest episodes of Washington Journal and find scheduling information for C-SPAN's TV networks and C-SPAN Radio, plus a variety of compelling podcasts. C-SPAN Now is available at the Apple Store and Google Play. Scan the QR code to download it for free today or visit our website, cspan.org/C-SPAN Now. C-SPAN Now, your front row seat to Washington, anytime, anywhere.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. It's free and wherever you find your podcasts. From CNN, President Joe Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, former President Donald Trump, and Senator J.D. Vance are commemorating the 23rd anniversary of the September 11th attacks, appearing to put political hostilities on the back burner for a moment as the nation remembers the tragedy. All four leaders were in New York on Wednesday for a commemoration event at Ground Zero in Manhattan. Trump and Harris, just hours past their first in-person meeting at the presidential debate Tuesday night, shook hands ahead of solemn commemorative ceremonies after Harris turned toward Trump and both extended a hand. Nearly 3,000 people were killed when Islamist terrorists hijacked 4 commercial airliners on September 11th, 2001. 2 planes were crashed into each of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan. Another plane was crashed into the Pentagon, and the 4th crashed in a field in rural Pennsylvania after passengers tried to thwart the hijacking. That was the article from CNN. President Biden and Vice President Harris also laid wreaths at the memorial in Shanksville, Pennsylvania today, and then at the Pentagon, and Donald Trump laid a wreath in Shanksville. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, the Democratic vice presidential nominee, is attending a 9/11 anniversary event in St. Paul. At Ground Zero in New York City, there was the traditional reading of the names of those who died.
Seima David Aoyama.
And my grandfather, Edward Joseph Papa. Grandpa Eddie, although I never got a chance to meet you, we share many of the same interests. Not only do we share the same name, but I also love to play golf. I also love the Mets and playing baseball just like you did. People always tell me we share the same smile and happy energy. I wish I could have met you, and I hope you're all making you proud.
And my dad, Stephen Francis Schlag. I love him and miss him as ever. All the years combine, they melt into a dream. Life is good, it's 88 and sunny.
Similar ceremonies took place at the Pentagon and in the field in Pennsylvania. Recitation of the names of each person killed on September 11, 2001, along with moments of silence when the planes struck the targets that day. At the Pentagon ceremony, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin talked about not letting the memory of the 9/11 attacks fade with time.
We have repaired the damage to this building, but we cannot repair the damage to your hearts. No words can take away your grief. No amount of time can make sense of the worst terrorist attack in American history. And I know that for those whose lives were changed forever on 9/11, it can feel as if more and more Americans are returning to normal life on each new September 11th. But not here, not at the Pentagon, because we remember. The men and women of the Department of Defense remember, and we always will. every September, we gather here near 184 memorial benches. But the troops and the personnel of this department don't need to come to this space to remember 9/11. You see, we don't just work near a memorial, we work in a memorial. Every day we serve in the only surviving building struck by Al-Qaeda on 9/11. And every day we carry a powerful sense of purpose. And that's why there's a piece of the wreckage from 9/11 on display outside my inner office. For every visitor and every teammate to see. It is a constant reminder that 9/11 isn't a part of our distant history. It is entwined in the department's mission. And it's captured in the stories of those who were here.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin at the 9/11 attacks anniversary ceremony at the Pentagon this morning. Story from Axios. The number of New York City Fire Department members who have died from 9/11 related illnesses in the decades since the attack now surpasses the number who died that day. The FDNY added the names of 32 individuals who died from health issues stemming from the rescue and recovery efforts at the World Trade Center to its memorial wall, bringing the total number who have died from ground zero-related illnesses to over 360. On the day the towers were struck, 343 FDNY members died. That was from Axios. This is Washington Today. Associated Press reporting from Ukraine. The United States and Britain pledged nearly $1.5 billion in additional aid to Ukraine on Wednesday during a visit to Kyiv by their top diplomats, as Ukrainian officials renewed their pleas to use Western-provided missiles against targets deeper into Russia. At a news conference, Secretary of State Antony Blinken was asked about the long-range weapons.
Thanks very much. Mychael Birnbaum from the Washington Post. Mr. Secretary, Mr. Foreign Secretary, question about ATACMS. How, and long-range missiles, Storm Shadows, how worried are you at this point about managing escalation with Russia, based on your conversations today? And does the Ukrainian desire to use ATACMS, Storm Shadows, long-range missiles against the Kerch Bridge that connects Crimea to mainland Russia make sense to you strategically? And what's your personal view of whether Ukraine needs this long-range capability of striking into Russian territory, especially now that, as you say, Iran has facilitated Russia's ability to strike more deeply into Ukraine?
First, we had a very good discussion today with the Foreign Minister, with President Zelensky, with this whole team about the situation on the battlefield, Ukraine's objectives, and what it needs to succeed going forward. And among other things, we discussed long-range fires, but a number of other things as well. And as I said at the outset, I'm going to take that discussion back to Washington to brief the President on what I heard. I know that David's doing the same. And both of our bosses, no doubt, will discuss this when they meet later this week, actually, on Friday in Washington. Just speaking for the United States, from day one, as you've heard me say, we have adjusted and adapted as needs have changed, as the battlefield has changed. And I have no doubt that we'll continue to do that as this evolves. You referenced escalation. Of course, that's one of the factors that we always consider, but it's certainly not the only factor, and it's not necessarily a dispositive factor. We have provided, as you know, extraordinary support to Ukraine over these more than 2 years. Not just training, not just money, but among our most sophisticated weapon systems, again, tied to what their needs are, tied to what can make them most effective. And I think the track record is there. We're determined to ensure that they have what they need to succeed. And when it comes to escalation, you made the point yourself. We've seen Russia now pursue and indeed escalate its attacks inside Ukraine on civilians, on energy infrastructure, as well as on the Ukrainian military that's defending its country. And we've now seen this action of Russia acquiring ballistic missiles from Iran, which will further empower their aggression in Ukraine. So if anyone is taking escalatory action, it would appear to be Mr. Putin and Russia. I'll leave specific targets and questions for the experts. And of course, I don't have personal views. I have professional views in my capacity as Secretary of State. And I'll be sharing what we've learned on this trip with the President in the coming days.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken at a news conference in Kyiv, Ukraine, with the British Foreign Secretary and Ukrainian Foreign Minister. They also had meetings earlier with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Story from TheHill.com. Top House Republicans this week called on President Biden to reverse a policy that prevents Ukraine from using American-made weapons to strike deep inside of Russia, arguing that restrictions have hampered Kyiv's, quote, ability to defeat Russia's war of aggression and have given the Kremlin's forces a sanctuary from which it can attack Ukraine with impunity. And in Washington, the House continued working on bills that the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party has called China Week. Bills to, quote, protect Americans against the military, economic, ideological, and technological threats posed by the Chinese Communist Party. One bill passed today would restrict Chinese nationals from buying U.S. farmland. Congressman Mike Flood, Republican from Nebraska, voted yes.
According to the USDA, as of 2022, foreign individuals held an interest in over 43 million acres of U.S. ag land. For context, 43 million acres is larger than the state of Florida and greater than the total land area of 29 U.S. states. Between December of 21 and December of 22, privately held foreign ag land increased by more than 3 million acres and now accounts for 3.4% of all privately held agricultural lands in the U.S. This is a real problem, and it's growing. Our nation's land is linked to our national security, our food supply, and energy resources. The rising trend of foreign ownership is highly concerning. The USDA is responsible for collecting data and reporting to Congress on foreign-owned ag land, but that's it. In its own words, the USDA does not have a role in reviewing the purchase or sale of ag land in our country. Additionally, the USDA has failed to penalize improper filing of ag land transactions by foreign nationals, further emphasizing its lack of sufficient enforcement authority in this area. Let me be clear. Foreign ag land ownership is a national security issue, and it should be treated as such. Over the last several years, we've all experienced firsthand the detrimental impact food and energy supply chain disruptions can have on our communities. Therefore, it's simply common sense that we pass this bill to expand CFIUS and better address this ongoing threat.
Congressman Mike Flood, Republican from Nebraska, today on the House floor. Congressman Mark Takano, Democrat from California, spoke in opposition to the bill.
H.R. 9456 would expand the kind of transactions that the Secretary of Agriculture is required to report to the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S., or otherwise known as CFIUS, including any farmland transaction by foreign persons of China, North Korea, Russia, or Iran. This broad definition of foreign persons would encompass all legal immigrants and refugees from these countries and require the Secretary to report on their agricultural land transactions. This opens the door to treating immigrants as national security threats solely because of their country of origin and harms Asian American communities across the board. I just want to recount that my own family, my father's family, was affected by the alien land laws that were prevalent on the west coast of the United States. My grandfather, Isao Takano, immigrated to this country through the port of Tacoma. And he married my American-born grandmother. He was not able to purchase land in his own name. And in fact, in the mid-30s, purchased 5 acres of land through my grandmother's name, and because she was an American citizen. But for the fact that my uncle was returning in uniform from the 442nd Infantry, notified the family that there was a lien against the property and they couldn't pay it in time because they were in internment camps. It's a terrible chapter in our history that this country passed alien land laws that affected so many of the families that my family knows.
Congressman Mark Takano, Democrat from California, on the House floor. The House passed this bill by a vote of 269 to 149. Another bill passed by the House today requires any pandemic-related agreement of the World Health Organization, WHO, must be considered and ratified by the U.S. Senate as a treaty, passed with a two-thirds majority vote to be legally binding on the United States. House passed that bill 219 to 199, two of the more than half dozen bills brought up in the House this week regarding China. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter, word for word, and you'll get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.